Hello and welcome to the Convey Culture Podcast. I always say this, but I'm super excited for this episode. I have with me Iesha. She's a digital marketer with a wealth of background, information, experience, and global experience, which I love to talk about, on both brand side, agency side, and everything in between. But what's most important to me is hearing about who you are, what you're interested in, how you identify, how does culture play a role in your everyday life. And so it's so wonderful to have you on the show. And very first question, how would you introduce yourself to a stranger?
Well, hi, like you mentioned, I'm Iesha. Thanks for having me. And generally how I introduce myself to a stranger, oh, that's a good question,
But this is
but
a friendly stranger, by the way. I always
a
say stranger.
friendly
It's not
stranger,
like
we're
stranger
cool.
danger. It's like, I want you to get there. There we go.
Couple things. I have an American accent, as you can tell, but I'm also British and I live in the United Kingdom. So it usually throws people off, especially here in Scotland. They're like, wait, you're British? And I'm like, just like you. And I have worked in digital marketing for coming up 10 years now. So like you mentioned, I've worked brand side, agency side, ad tech side, ad ops side. And I'm just super passionate about digital marketing in general. So my depth of expertise really is mostly in programmatic, but I've stepped foot in direct buys, including like print, a little linear, as well as I've taught myself SEO and doing some content. So I'm really trying to become this digital marketing maven, hopefully one day. But yeah, that's kind of what sums me up. I identify as a Black woman of mixed race background. And yeah, I love everything about it. And I'm happily married. And I have a cute little Chihuahua dog and a black cat.
I love it. All those elements. And I know it's so interesting we talk about being Black in this space, in this marketing space. And it is definitely a journey. I think everyone I talk to is entered in. One, there's not very many of us. So it also feels like when you meet someone, you're like, I know you, even though you don't know someone, you have this immediate connection of kind of the journey into this space. So how did you get into digital marketing? Your background, is it technically in digital marketing or your education isn't? So how'd you get in?
No, my degree is actually in international relations. So baby Aisha wanted to be a diplomat so bad and work in nonprofits, one of those two things. But I graduated from university in 2014 and it was just a different world back then and it was economically, down and just wasn't possible. So I got really lucky that I got an internship at an ad tech firm. And I actually got my internship in HR. And I felt like there were a lot of like transferable skills, like, a lot of like stuff I had to learn around like anthropology and like working with people. I was able to kind of apply that sort of stuff. Even some of the legal stuff you learn in that sort of degree was helpful with HR just a little bit. And I was working in HR. I went full time eventually. And one day I'm just kind of, minding my business. It was a startup. So I did a little of everything.
Many,
um,
yeah.
as startups do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was updating the WordPress for the site. And the president of the company comes over and he goes, Aisha. And I said, yes, sir. Like, well, can I help you? Like, what can I do? He's like, you know how to code, right? And I said, no, I know how to read code.
Yeah.
I said, I was like, WordPress is like very basic HTML. That's it.
Right.
And he was like, yeah, whatever. Same thing. Anyway, I need you to move over to like the actual like product like side and work on our latest product where we build campaigns. And I was like, I don't know anything about that. I don't have a degree in marketing. He's like, it's fine. He's like, so going back, right, it was 2015. Nobody really was
I had a
doing
degree
this
in
and that.
marketing and digital. Yeah.
No, it was still in its infancy. So he was like, I don't want to hear that as excuses. Like, come on, like, you'll be great. Don't worry about it. You should trust me. I'm an expert. And I was like, okay. So I took that leap of faith. Literally 6 months into my new job, I was good at it. I really liked it. And he's like, I heard you're really good at this. I said, yes, sir, I really enjoy it. He's like, that's great. I want you to work on the programmatic team now.
Ooh, yeah.
And I said, program what? And he's like, yeah, it's fine because you know how to code. And I said, again, I don't know how to code. And he's like, yeah, whatever, you can read code. He's like, I need an ad ops person. You'll pick it up. No one knows how to do this. You'll learn. He's like, that's what YouTube's for. And he was right. I went straight over. I really loved it and I've stuck with it since. So he was totally right. So shout out to John Brown, who was that president who took a chance on me and just saw something in me that I had no idea, but he identified a light in me. So that was my first probably big sponsor, like someone who really
Yes.
saw me and for my, potential.
That story to me pretty much sums up what I think. I mentor a lot of youth, and I sometimes they think that their mentor or sponsor will look just like them or something. And it's like, you're going to get asked. A sponsor sometimes is someone who just amplifies you, but also may push you in really scary directions. You could have said no, right? Like, imagine how different your life would be if you said no. And you were
Yeah.
like, how much do I get paid? Like, of course, all those things matter, but you're just like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
let me try something. And that's an energy that I think makes you very successful in advertising, is the ability to kind of pivot. And we're working with such fast technology that it's not like you get to be an expert at everything in every moment.
Absolutely. And that was something because I was like, I'm a recovering perfectionist, as I put it. And so I remember being so scared, like, I don't know anything about this stuff. And I remember he was just like, no one knows how to do this. Like, it's fine. He's like, you will be fine. He's like, you're smart. You'll figure it out. He's like, as long as you're open, it's cool. And I was like, well, I can be open. I can work with that. And he's like, that's all you need. And he was totally right. But like you said, he didn't look like me. We didn't have anything really in common, but he just saw me and decided that's,
I see
he
what
wanted to
you're
push me in
seeing,
that
the talent
direction.
in you, right?
Yeah.
I do think that being open to career pivots is so important in being successful in any industry. It's like, try new things. You may not, this
Yeah.
idea that you go to college and major in something and immediately know the path for the rest of your life is hilarious. I'm like, you won't think about that degree again, likely, depending on where you go in your future.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you find it culturally being a Black woman in this space? How do you find it? Because you have the advantage of seeing global dynamics, and US has a very different history with racism and systematic things that you will not see. Every country has their thing, but have you found kind of the differences of being a Black woman in this space and working in a global landscape?
So I've lived in the UK, specifically in Scotland, for about a year. So I've definitely noticed some differences already because the bulk of my experience is in the States and bulk of marketing, experiences in the States too. And yeah, it's very jarring at first to go into a space and you are the only person like yourself. Sometimes you're the only person on your immediate team, but more often you're the only person in your immediate department. You might be the only person in your entire like division, like of the business, like who you're, who would exec you report up into. You might be the only person who looks like you or has those experiences. And I've definitely, sat in meetings where people are talking about, oh, well, we need to reach the Black community for this new product, or this, that, and the other. They're not asking my opinion.
Yeah.
They're talking around everyone. And you hear something, you're like, that feels bad. You're like, that's not how I would approach this. That's not realistic to my experience or anyone else. And so you kind of end up walking these like almost like these two burdens in a way where you're like, often you're not consulted. You have to hear things and put up with things that don't sound and feel good. But then on the flip, when you do get asked, you're expected to speak for the whole spectrum of the Black experience. And you're like, whoa, I'm African American in ethnicity.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm not, going to be the expert on someone who's Caribbean American.
You're right.
And what cultural values that they may hold specific and dear, or how to reach them best. I was like, I can't speak for all of that just because we might all share a skin tone.
Right. And that I think you and I share that similarity because you also really focused on building out multicultural practices. I've done the same, but I think it's that pressure of you represent a community, but as someone who is part of the community, you're very aware that I don't know all elements of this. So that was a big thing for me. I felt a pressure, my own internal pressure, that goal of perfectionism to get educated, because I'm like, if you're going to put me in a space where I have to speak and advocate, what I don't want to do is regurgitate stereotypes or something I assume. Like, let me be super educated in that space. And so that was a journey I just chose to go on. But I do feel like you have two options. You either sit silently or you go all in and you make an impact for your community. And neither choice is wrong, but it's just a matter of like, it is an extra burden on you to kind of take that leap forward. And how did you feel kind of having to navigate that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think I was working somewhere for a long while, and I had been hearing this sort of stuff. They had, to put it bluntly, one Black product a year they would put out.
No.
And I've been working there for a couple of years, and one day I was just kind of sick of it, because what I started hearing was, oh, well, just put it on BET.
Oh my
And that was it. That was it. Like, it was very one note. Like, it just needs to be on BET. And I was sitting there, and so I remember I was like, I don't care what people think anymore, because I'm the only person that looks like me in this room anyway, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. And so I like spoke up, and I said, hi, you guys are wanting to reach a specific age group within the Black community. I said, you're wanting to reach like people in their very, very early 20s. I said, I don't think BET is that for you. And they kind of all rounded on me. There were execs in this room, executive vice presidents and stuff, rounded on me. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, what I mean is that BET trends a bit older. There's nothing wrong with BET, but that's not, if you're wanting to make this work, that's not what I recommend. Yeah. And they're like, well, what do you recommend? I was like, well, as somebody in the age bracket that you're looking to reach, I said, have you thought about reaching folks on different platforms? Like, what about Blavity?
Right.
What about Travel Noir?
Yeah.
And they were like, then they go, oh, I've never heard of that. I can't trust what I don't know. And at that point, I didn't have the language at the time, but I remember thinking, well, it's not for you.
No, you're not the
target audience,
so why would you have listened to it? Right.
Right. And so I think that's the issue often that I've encountered in marketing again and again and again, is that if it's not within somebody's specific reach that like they feel like they know it, or it has that sort of like recognition for them, particularly as it relates to diverse and multicultural marketing, folks are like, well, I don't want to do it. It's not quote unquote proven. And I think that's a misstep. I really do. Because if you just keep relying on the same old stuff that BET and ESPN Deportes is going to, really take you over the edge, but then you're not getting the returns you want, you're not seeing, the benefits. And then you're like, I don't know what we did. But then the next time that product comes around that you got to sell, you do the same thing. You're just repeating yourself.
Right. And why does general market get the benefit of a test and learn, but
Thank you.
not let multicultural campaigns get the benefit of a test and learn? Or often you're educating them on the consumption. I'm like, Black Americans are one of the highest consumers of digital content. They have some of the most advanced technology in their homes as it comes to streaming devices. They're most likely to adopt new technology. But then you say that and they're like, so not BET? And I'm like, what is with you all in BET? Like there's like one network. I mean, what other campaign would you ever only think about one network on? So it baffles me. I think to hear that in the industry and hear it happen so frequently. We were at a advertising week a couple weeks ago. And Dennis, who's the founder of Sundial Brand, said, it's interesting, but what these brands don't realize, if they don't invest in multicultural marketing, the market will punish them. The market will punish you. So I think that's such a profound quote, because what they assume is testing successfully on BET is not testing anything. But if you don't diversify your media, if you don't reach that consumer, the market will punish you just based on our demographics and numbers. You're missing out on a huge segment, and an influential segment. It's just, absolutely, get it together. I'm like always amazed how much you have to fight for that point when there's case studies, there's proven, there's like, you look at Nike did with Jordan, clearly that's a success. It's just fascinating how much you have to push for it. So.
There is, what you said really resonated with me, and it's something I've struggled with in every single company and every single role I've held, which is, I've never heard of that. I don't want to test into it, or I'll give it $5,000, right? But we want to reach US Latinos. Here's $5,000. To reach 20+% of the population, you want to spend $5,000?
No.
Really? Why? But like you said, when it comes to general marketing, ooh, let's do this experiential thing with QR codes and the metaverse. And like people will start throwing all sorts of really fancy, amazing, crazy ideas. But then it's like I said, as soon as it's outside of their realm of knowledge, BET, Univision, the end.
That's all we're doing.
It's wild. I've even heard people dabble in really offensive thinking as well. Like, as in, well, this demographic doesn't need to be marketed to. So I'll give you an example that I've heard is Black people don't watch anime. Well, I know for a fact that's not true.
Right?
I was like, there's been literal PhD theses done on how like for example, Dragon Ball Z like has a hold on like the Black community in
A
particular.
stronghold on the Black community.
Stronghold. And I was like, we are out, and I love anime. And I remember sitting here, and someone was like, you don't need to market to exclude the Black community in this because it's a waste of money. And I like, and that thinking I think is pervasive.
Right.
I've heard similar things like, oh, this is really expensive, let's exclude this community. And it's like, well, what are you trying to say?
Right.
That a specific community can't afford something? And I think people say this stuff and they don't draw the line of how it really affects,
right,
one, the marketers in the room who are potentially a part of those communities, and then second, consumers can smell that. They know. They absolutely know. Gen Z is going to be the most diverse group ever, and they are going to have 260 billion with a B in pocket money. That is the latest study that's coming out. And Gen Z has also said, there's multiple studies been done. If you do not spend authentically and have a brand value alignment with how you market to us, we're not going to spend with your brand.
Yes.
And I think marketers are still stuck on, they're like, well, BET and Univision. And it's like, whoa, like, no. You need to spend authentically. And that means you need to make the extra effort when you're doing influencer marketing. When you're buying on YouTube, are you buying on, YouTube channels that look and feel and reach out to the communities you're looking to target? Like, I'm, respectfully, I'm not going to, if I'm looking for a new hair straightener, I'm not going to go and look for a influencer or a content creator who has stick straight hair who's trying out that straightener. I want to see someone who's got hair like mine.
Yeah. And there's so many case studies in the marketplace that I don't understand the constant hesitation or pushback. You look at Savage Fenty and the work that immediately out the door, Rihanna was like, I'm going to make it inclusive. And you go to their site and you see someone that's representative of you. You could be a mom with stretch marks and you see someone who's representative of you. You could be. And so it's like, yes, you can definitely you can do brave things. You can reach different audiences. But when you see the investment levels they had to make out of the gate, they didn't make a lot of investment levels in paid marketing out of the gate. They did organic because they're like, find people who communicate with that community, who are part of that community, and leverage those relationships. And that's a successful model. Yeah. But it's also this odd hesitancy for them to do the work, do the research, do the work. And I could go down a whole thing on this, but I also feel like the tools they use are so biased. Like MRI, they're like, we use MRI and the MRI says all Black people watch BET. I'm like, but MRI is a survey-based tool of people who watch television. So if you're looking at the amount of people who stream in those communities and those demographics, that isn't even a good tool for you to be using to talk about this. So it's just...
I agree.
Yeah.
So absolutely agree. On that note, I spoke to a partner recently and I was asking them and I was like, they were saying, oh, well, we've come up with these ways to identify ethnic and racial groups via AI. And I said, okay, can you help me with this a bit? They're like, yeah. So like we've got all like this data that we've trained and we have all these like human analysts that, we've like identified manually. And then we've trained the data on what the manual analysts have done. I said, okay. I said, so what's the makeup of your analyst pool? And it was, well, I said, do you have an AI ethicist on staff who is taking a look and making sure that the data that you're including is not racially biased? Yes. Because again, no one contains everything, right? We all contain multitudes, but we don't all contain everything. So I said, has that been done? Have we made sure that like the AI that you're using and the models that you're using have been debiased efficiently, or at least you're accounting for potential bias? Crickets. I said, appreciate that I don't think it's a fit at this point.
No.
And this is what I think the danger is, because you cannot, my opinion is you cannot automate your way to inclusivity and equity, or we would have done it already. We would have done it a long time ago, and we haven't gotten there. And I don't think AI is going to make it easier. There's all these articles that have come out. There was a great article in Rolling Stone recently talking about how a lot of AI data sets are unfortunately biased, and that the teams that work on them are not diverse themselves. So what you end up having is like this like really kind of like effect, cause and effect, just kind of keeps going that it's like it's nothing sufficiently debiased because it's debiased from the front, and then when you get the outputs, they're biased too.
And
And
the slowness of learning that lesson that always like
yeah,
boggles my mind.
so it to me, we as humans all have a lot of work to
Yeah.
do. And the machines, it's not the machine's fault. It's not the algorithm's fault. We have a duty to make sure that we are including data that has been efficiently debiased, and that we're being active about where we know that our spots are that we cannot see, and
Right.
that's the thing, is just knowing. But I think that there's a lot of bravado right now, and a lot of pushing forward that, well, uh it's unfortunately it's the same as what we do manually. Well, I only know what I know, and that's BET, Univision, ESPN Deportes, that's it. And when we take that mindset into AI, we just compound the issue.
Yeah. We stack bad data with bad data. And it's true. You can ask AI questions now. And I think there's interesting elements of AI that does create equity. For example, some of the work you can do with resume. Now, I would
Yeah,
argue, is it creating equity, or is it allowing people who aren't part of certain groups that the systems have built for? Is it creating equity because now they can mimic what this group is saying from a culture perspective,
sure.
right? So sometimes I think what we're talking about as equity in AI is actually this mimicry of whiteness, essentially, that allows
Yeah,
someone to navigate a system where typically they wouldn't. Like having a name like Bianca or Iesha may have problems with your resume, but if the rest of it reads in a certain flow, they're like, oh, okay, this person fits a systematic understanding we have of what is successful in our organization. But I would
absolutely.
agree. I don't think there's enough cultural relevance. We talked about anime. It is fascinating to me when I bring up anime and I'm like, oh, this is a great way to, reach the Black audience, and not just Black audience, Gen Z youth in general. The
Love
consumption rates of
anime.
AI are really high. And they're like, no, I don't. I heard they don't read subtitles. Who is they and where are you getting that? Like the little things you'll hear is off comments. And I'm like, what? Like we have data that shows most people watch video with the silence off. So when you talk about not reading subtitles, half of, social media is experiencing subtitles. So it's just fascinating to me the made up barriers that they will put in place not to invest in marketing. But really,
Yes.
you're leaving money on the table, right? This is
Yes.
a proven audience. This, to your point, and I talk about this all day, will be a majority minority nation by 2030. So by
Right.
not acknowledging these populations and investing in research, you're losing money. And we're the younger demographic of the population too. So
Yes.
it's fascinating to watch. I almost think the ego or the arrogance to think that you will remain in a position of dominance and that you don't actually need to focus on your consumers. That is
Right.
so strange to me.
I totally agree. Multicultural marketing is general marketing now.
It is.
Multicultural and diverse folks of all types are a plurality now, and like you mentioned, they're going to be a majority soon. So if you are purposefully, I agree with you, centering whiteness in particular, you're like, well, when I do general marketing, I get those people anyway, and you just make that assumption. You're again operating off of what you think is within reach
Yeah.
and what is accessible to you. But I always have made the joke that in the Black community is like, we watch everything the general white market watches plus extra
Plus more.
plus more. So if you want, and we know when someone's taken the extra effort to reach us on something that's not necessarily as accessible to a brand, that's not necessarily their first instinct. We know. We also often know when, and this is a common thing across multiple ethnicities and other diverse identities, is we know when folks are in the room that look like us make the ad, do the targeting. We can
You can
tell.
tell, right? Like I'm like, ooh, who wasn't in? Like it's almost like this moment when you're like, oh, I know no one was in the room for this, or you
Yeah,
didn't listen to the one person that was in the room, or they were too tired to fight that battle that morning. Like,
exactly. And it can't always be on the one person in the room or the few people in the room. And at the end of the day, like you said, like a lot of the folks who are the decision makers don't necessarily look like the folks they're looking to reach. So at the end of the day, and again, that doesn't necessarily mean that those folks are going to automatically make a poor decision or a wrong decision. But what it does mean is that I think that it takes all of us.
right.
We cannot, as multicultural and diverse marketers, we cannot do it without the folks who are making the decisions and calling the shots. And that is not yet diverse in every way. And like I said, we all contain multitudes, but we don't contain everything. So even if I were to receive, a marketing brief and I was the big boss and it was dedicated, to the Southeast Asian market, I'm not culturally competent in that way to know, oh, this is totally authentic. Because for all I know, maybe something in there is not good or worse, offensive to that community. And I'm like, and I would have no idea because again, I've never navigated that
Right.
space. So it's important to make sure that we don't make these sorts of decisions in vacuums, and that when you have access, internet's thankfully, a great place.
Hey,
There's a lot of things to learn.
you scoop.
But when you have multicultural marketers in the room, even if they're not dedicated to multicultural and diverse marketing in essence, I still think it's important to does anybody have any concerns with this?
Hey.
Does this feel okay? Does this feel good to everybody in the room? Do we have, do we think that this will be received well?
Right.
You might be surprised what you learn. Someone might say, "Ooh, actually, this is feeling a little, Kendall Jenner and Pepsi-ish."
Right? Like I'm trying to give it. I think too, I feel, and this is, if I had a magic wand and create the world, I do think you need to have a cultural review before something goes to market. I do think within product development, there should be stops of like, hey, we need a cultural review. The Spider-Man video game just had this major issue that they swapped a Puerto Rican flag with a Cuban flag. And it was like, someone in the room didn't do it. Like, if you knew your target audience was the Hispanic consumer, the Latinx consumer, if you knew that was your target audience, why would you not have a cultural review moment in that session? Right. And the movie was so good. So I don't want to take anything away from what they did. It was just incredible. I felt like they actually did a really good job with multicultural in the movie. But have cultural review stops. It doesn't even need to be someone who's been in our industry for forever. I think you really should have segments of the population, get a teenager, get this, and this is our cultural review. Each of you watch it. Do you catch anything for it?
Yeah.
Save yourself some
headache. Focus group.
Yeah. Have a focus group of community, right? I just don't understand the ego. And we're not even talking about something that is a massive cost. There's not a massive cost in creating that and safeguarding and also it will have a positive impact on your business to have cultural authenticity and alignment. It's
absolutely, there is no real replacement for that sort of authenticity. Like we mentioned, consumers can tell. The other thing that I think that grinds my goat around multicultural and diverse marketing is and consumers can tell this, when it's Black History Month, it's Pride Month, it's Hispanic Heritage Month, let's go all out on that month, and then we're quiet the rest of the year. And we have no strategy on how we engage these consumers as part of our marketing strategy overall. And I keep hearing from so many people so high up in media who are like, well, we should just, engage consumers when it's convenient, meaning during a heritage month of some type, or if the brands want it. And I think that's interesting because, again, it goes back to, well, we know that things aren't as diverse as we would like them to be, and not everybody is as clued in or keyed up on what's going on. So you run the risk of, one, not being authentic. You're turning on a little faucet, here and there for 1 month or 1 week or 1 day or whatever it is. And, have you really considered that, I'm not just a Black woman, in the month of February, or in the UK, October, have you considered that part? I should be engaged year round with culturally relevant, sensitive marketing that makes sense for me, and that makes me want to take action and say, oh, this brand's not just cashing in because it's a fad. They're truly looking to engage me as a loyal consumer, and they have a similar values to what I have for myself.
Agreed. And there's so many studies too where you see people are willing to pay a premium for those type of services. There's a premium. McKinsey did a really good report about their willingness to pay more if you feel like it aligns with your brand, if the product was made for your hair, all of those things. I think it also baffles my, I keep saying this, but when you flood everything Black History Month, you're not even getting an ROI from that. No one's giving you extra credit for that. No one in the population, even for Pride Month, you flood it and everyone's kind of eye roll because they're you haven't been an authentic partner to this community for the entire portion of the year. So it's actually not even a worthwhile investment when I'm not saying you don't acknowledge those months, but when that's your full budget is in January, you have done
Right.
yourself a disservice. Like, you have not
Absolutely.
helped your brand by doing that. And so I just don't understand. It's like if I went to a marketer and be like, only spend money the week of 4th of July because that's what matters to Americans. How is that good advice, right? Like,
Right.
that would be the same overlap.
That's a great metaphor,
Yeah.
right? For a multinational brand. Say, oh, well, for Americans, we're only going to spend the week of 4th of July. That would, everybody be like, are you stupid? Like,
You're
that's
like, what?
crazy.
You're fine.
Why would you do that? But the same logic applies for, unfortunately, that same logic gets applied,
Right.
like you said, for heritage months or for specific holidays like Juneteenth. Like, that was a big thing. And people were just like, well, I'm just going to sprinkle in. But like you said, like, it gets so crowded because it's expected. If you want to really authentically engage these folks, you need to be doing it year round. And there are lots of ways to do that that, you know, aren't necessarily, you know, super like flashy and big and loud. Like, it might just be as simple as, hey, we spend a lot on YouTube every year, and you know, it'd be a really good idea. Like, let's make sure that in the YouTube lineups that we buy with, that we're making sure that there are some folks of all varying backgrounds in the YouTube allow list, and that's all the content creators, you know, it's a diverse set that we're buying with. It's that simple. It, you know, it is the execution take a little bit more thought, absolutely, but there are some really awesome partners coming to the forefront now who are like, we've done this work, like, and you know, we're making sure that people are self-attesting or providing, you know, certain certificates around, like, you know, the NMSDC, and like, we feel, you know, confident that these folks really do represent, you know, the communities, and that they give back to these communities, and it's, you know, it's a worthwhile endeavor. Like, just ask those sorts of questions of your agencies, ask the brands, ask those questions of your agencies ask those sorts of questions of your activating partners. Like, there's lots of great companies who are willing to help you build that framework if you don't know how.
Agree. There's so much good. Like, Group Black did this great.
Love them.
They did an incredible thing. We have content, we have data, we have all things. So they're making it a package and a bow. Like, they're making it easy for you. So I really do appreciate. They said essentially, we're eliminating the excuses for you not to reach out to this community. And I think at some point the excuses will get tired, right? Like, at some point they're going to have to say, okay, this doesn't necessarily make sense. And there's brands who are doing it well, and you're seeing improvement. So I always, when I see a brand doing it well, I feel like I have to reward them as a consumer sometimes. So I'm like, you did great with that. I saw a Gap commercial the other day, and they just did such a good job with inclusivity. And I didn't even know it was a commercial at first. It was a YouTube thing, and I felt pulled in, and I'm like, that's what holiday. And so I immediately like went and bought something, because I'm like, I want to reward you for like acknowledging a community authentically.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. I think that there's so many great partners. Group Black, like, they did a really great job of, like you said, doing all of that legwork and that groundwork. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, there's been a lot of articles that's come out that, you know, these agencies in particular and brands made all of these commitments in 2020 and 2021, and almost nobody has delivered on those. Right? That we're going to spend X amount of, you know, 5% or whatever it is with Black owned media. And then it got, you know, diluted a bit. And it's like, well, 5% with multicultural media. Well, then some of them came out and it was like, well, we spent with BET. And it's like, well, how was that different than what you were doing before?
You were doing it already. So you just repeated your same buy.
But you just repeated it.
But also, does your spending match? Let's just say, does your spending match the population? And that to me is the simplest thing. Like, I agree. You can put income. You want to put an income layer, fine. Put over household 75K, whatever you want. Does your marketing budget or who you're reaching match the population? And that to me is a easy, fair way to just say you're off base. Like, yes, you think because of George Floyd, you're doing something to give back. But in the reality, you're making poor business decisions by not investing in this community.
I absolutely agree. Like, I think as an industry, we do a really poor job of thinking critically on things like this. We will analyze to death attribution and, like, you know, Google is sunsetting IP addresses in Chrome for tracking. Like, and like, I love all that stuff. I'm a big nerd. Like, have an ad ops background originally. That's all the stuff like I definitely all care about. But then when it comes to, hey, are we spending inclusively and equitably? Like, are we making sure that the you know, publishing partners that we're working with are, you know, potentially diverse, owned and operated? Crickets. And it's like, well, like, what we're doing is working. And it's like, well, it's working, but what if you could actually be unlocking even more?
Oh,
You could be unlocking what you don't know. Well, and like what I keep hearing is, well, there's no case studies. Some of that's not true. There are
yeah.
some case studies that exist, but especially as it relates to multicultural marketing, there are a lot of case studies. When it comes to more, like, I use the word diverse to
Right.
include other identities that are
Mhm.
often excluded, such as like folks who consider themselves disabled,
Right.
or folks who are veterans,
Yes.
and also like folks who may consider themselves part of the LGBTQIA
Right.
community. Like, there's no data on that, on how we're spending with those owned and operated entities, publishers and stuff, because the industry hasn't made it priority to commission a case study.
No.
So there's no data. So the problem that we run into is like, well, there's no data. So that says we're going to be able to improve anything. So we're not going to improve anything. And it's like, but that you don't spend there.
Right.
You haven't reached out to Reverie as a partner I really love from the LGBTQIA
Yes.
community for CTV. You're not currently spending with like a Reverie or someone like them. So like, let's like use some common sense, right? That you're not spending there. So you're probably not being equitable. You're like, well, I catch them all in general marketing, but then during Pride Month, maybe they want to spend $1 billion on it, but then they don't spend the rest of the rest of the year. And it's kind of like,
And they
folks can
miss
tell you're not being legit.
in that too. I'm like, you miss the fact that you are not a monolith just because you're part of the LGBTQ plus. You're not a monolith just because you're in that community. You have other interests, and so
Yes.
I wouldn't describe my main interest as who I am as a human as being Black. It's a huge part of who I am, but
Yes.
there's a lot of other ways. Like, that's why you don't believe that we watch anime. That's why you don't believe we love cooking shows about gourmet restaurants, and that's why
Right.
some of these misconceptions keep getting reinforced, because you see us as a Black individual rather than someone
Right.
who has multiple elements about them that would change the way you market. And that's another reason why content, we've talked a lot about where to buy the media, but I'm like, you need more people giving influence to content. And so I guess
Correct.
that actually branches to a question, because we could go on this forever, but how do we get more people in the industry? Not that it's our responsibility, but I constantly think, how do you encourage someone to get into this industry, especially AI? I've even been studying cybersecurity because I'm
Ooh.
fascinated by this idea that if the world moves to digital, how does that impact systematic injustice that we're already experiencing? How does that matter? And the hate crimes you're seeing and some of those things. So what about cybersecurity is allowing for some of these things to happen, or for certain groups to be hyper targeted? I just find it fascinating. But how do we get more people excited about it? How do we get more people in the industry? What do you think?
I think the biggest thing is we've really got to clear a lot of the biases that we hold in hiring. Ooh, that they went to this school, and I never heard of that school. That's not
Right.
prestigious. I think what I have noticed, especially at my time in the US, that is a little bit different from the UK, is that there is a big emphasis on who you already know.
Yes.
And so I know when I, broke into the industry, like it was a bit different, but I know when I went to a large holding co, this is my sorority sister. This is my sorority sister. This is the, we were all in this club together in university, and these were like, people in their very early 20s, and they're referring each other in, which I think is great. Oh, and my, what do they call it? Like, like my god sponsor or whatever they call it, like my grand big or whatever.
Yeah.
My grand big, is like is the associate director of this department. And there's a lot of that, I think, particularly in the States, especially what I've noticed like in New York City and Los Angeles. And so that stuff can be very difficult, because then it's like, well, it's all based on who you know.
Right.
And it's like, well, if you're coming up, maybe you've got an untraditional career path, or you didn't go to a school that has a very large Greek life, and you're not necessarily part of those specific frats or sororities or groups. You don't necessarily have that in. So I think that's one thing I think folks should reconsider, is like the biases that you see in hiring. Because again, like no one really talks about like sororities or frats in hiring, but I've noticed, I'm just saying anecdotally, that's something I have noticed.
It is. That referral pool is very,
yes.
I completely agree. And even for me, when I talk about how I got a lot of positions, typically it was a referral from someone who was in a community like that, right? Who was a white professional who had built a whole success with generations of success, and they decided to open a door for me, essentially.
Yes.
And I know even for me, I'm trying to do as much mentorship as possible, because I'm also like, how do I connect you? How do I push buttons in your elevator because someone's done it for me? But as the one in the company, it can be so much work to be the mentor for all these people. So I do think it's like, to your point about bias, other humans have to open the aperture to want a more diverse environment around them. Like, that is the other thing I think is when people are like, oh, what should I do? Mentor people who don't look like you. Like, mentor someone who looks different from you.
And I'll even take it a step further. I love Cindy Gallup. I love her so much. And the biggest thing that I've seen her say is like, mentors are great and everything, but what people really need, in particular women, are sponsors, because we cannot do it without sponsors. And what she means by that is there's so many like women, right, but they're not necessarily in the exec seat. And she's just talking about generally, but we can also apply this to folks of color as well. And so you can't do it without them. There's not enough, like for me in particular, there's not enough Black women in exec that can pull me up. Like I've only worked with an exec that's a Black woman one time in my entire career, once, and I've been in the industry 10 years. Right. So I know I can't necessarily like rely on that, like as a lever to pull, but like that first sponsor I talked about, John Brown, that was a white man, nothing, we have no background, but he just saw something in me. That is what we need, is where folks are like, I see something in somebody and I'm going to pull them along with me. What I like to say is, don't pull the ladder up behind you. For us, once you do get there and someone does extend that grace to you, you should not be pulling the ladder up. You're like, well, I got mine. No. Because that's another thing I think that happens. Folks are like, well, I'm exceptional. I worked hard. You totally did work hard. No doubt. But you can't pull the ladder. You should not be pulling the ladder up behind you, being like, well, I worked hard and, I got a lucky break one time, and so everybody else has to do it on their own. And I do think sometimes we don't see as much of that. And I agree with you, Bianca. Like, we can't, as one human, you just mentally don't have necessarily the capacity to mentor everybody who wants to, be with you. Just because you happen to be a Black woman, there might be 5 or 6 Black women that are more junior than you in an organization. That can be difficult. But when you do have the opportunity to say like, hey, I'm noticing that, so-and-so, like they killed that project. And I know that this project's coming down the pipeline. They should probably work on that project. It's got great visibility with the finance team. It's small. A lot of it's small stuff. We cannot do it without our sponsors, and our sponsors don't always look like us. And the thing is like the onus really here is on the folks who, if you can sponsor somebody, it can be little things. It doesn't have to be formal. Just, you see somebody and you're like, they do this so awesome. They worked on this really awesome project. They worked their ass off. Say, you know what?
No.
Just do that.
Elevator open. I always feel that. Like, you see someone running for the elevator, I'm like, hold it open. It's that mentality. But I would agree. I think Rich Paul, I just finished his book talking about being LeBron James' agent, but it was really his story. And there were so many moments in that book where it's like, the skills that a lot of these kids learn on the streets or at school, or their hustle, or they're develop their own influencer thing, or they have something they're building, the entrepreneurship you see out of communities out of need, right? Someone's not ready to check for college. That deserves recognition, I think, when you're talking to someone. So even I've seen like kids on the street when they're hustling things. I'm like, hey, what industry you'd be so good in? It's like, but if you don't know, those are 2 issues I think we have. One, whenever I do speaking engagements at colleges, I think it's really interesting to see the people of color, their eyes kind of opening, like, I didn't know that was an opportunity, because you're not exposed to that. You're not at dinner parties with your parents talking about these different industries. No. So it's like, even you just having a platform and talking about your work, whenever I'm in rooms with teenagers, I'm like, let me tell you what I do. And they're like, we don't care. I'm like, no, you're going to care. Let me tell you how cool this is. And let me tell you the pivots. Because I do think that our community, I grew up Costa Rican grandparents and my family, and it's like, doctor, lawyer, this, like they're told that, so they don't understand the breadth. So you have 2 responsibilities as sponsor: 1, to introduce to an industry; 2, to open doors. I feel like those are your 2 roles, is like expand on what we need in the industry in the future too.
I absolutely agree.
The cat paw, like,
sorry.
No, it was really cute. It was like, just to touch the hem of your garment.
I didn't know he was in here in my office, but he has decided to make his appearance, and he has demanded penance, which is pets.
Yes.
But no, I definitely agree. Like we have to all like work together as a collective, and I totally agree with you. I was talking with somebody the other day, and they were like, I just love styling my stuff on Instagram. I just love that. And they're like, and I originally they either like I wanted to be, like a TV agent, one of those agents for actors. And they're like, but I live in down south. I live like in Florida or something. And I was like, well, have you ever thought about, working at an influencer agency and like doing talent roster management that way? And they were like, you can do that? And I was like, yeah, you can do that. I said, totally. This person's been in marketing actually quite a long time, but they had no idea. And I said, that's the best thing about our industry. Things are growing, changing all the time. I said, yeah, you're probably really good at it. You should totally consider applying to an influencer marketing agency and going forth and saying like, hey, like, I have some experience, styling stuff for my friends and coming up with concepts. And this person was like, oh my God, I had no idea.
No idea.
And she was so excited. She was so excited. And I said, well, let's do some research together. Let's see what, influencer marketing agencies are potentially hiring. And let's see, if we can work on a resume for you real quick.
Right.
And she's like, well, I don't have a portfolio. And I said, who cares? I said, we'll create one.
Let's figure it out. You've done enough work. You have your resume out there on Instagram. I love that. Those little moments where you just watch someone's eyes light up. And I'm always like, go on Coursera. Look at things that interest you. See what little certificates you can get. And when you're in high school, do it. I tell high school students, college is amazing, but it will not open a door you think it will. Like it'll be great. You have a degree, but you're going to have to do other things. So build tangible skills that you're excited about, because you may unravel something in your education that you're like, whoa, I did not know that was even feasible. Like AI, analytics, should be a pilot. Like you never know if your mind is stuck in this one frame of knowledge. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now we'll get to rapid fire. But before that, since you touched on social media, as a marketer, how does social media influence you? Like what relationship do you have for social media?
I have a love-hate relationship with social media. So I'm a big user of like YouTube and like Instagram, but not too much else anymore.
Yep.
But I definitely feel like I get a lot of inspo for like targeting, for example.
Yes.
So if someone's like, ooh, like I'm making this up, a beauty brand's like, oh, I would love to, go after, people in a specific demographic, age 18 to 34. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm noticing what's popping off with, on Instagram and, is X, Y, and Z. And I was like, maybe we could try like, a content keyword list. It's worth a try. Can't hurt. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And we just turn it off because that's performance media.
You do.
And they're like, okay, let's give it a try. And sometimes, you really do get really cool results just from, not relying on the stuff you do all the time or the stuff that just comes within reach.
I know. Every time I want to get off social media because I'm like, I'm like, no, you got to stay on because it's a tool of our industry. Like you have to stay on the pulse of it.
Keeps you fresh.
And also I've learned now to curate my feed to what inspires me. Like if there's a moment where I'm like, ooh, why is this person? And they could be doing nothing wrong, but something about them gives me the icks. I'm like, I have to remove you from my feed because something about you is like plaguing me. I don't know what it is. You're like,
absolutely.
It could be anything. All right, rapid fire questions. We talked all about the industry. Let's talk about you. If you could work with any brand, who would it be and why?
Honestly, I feel like it's going to have to be Ms. Robin Fenty herself. I've got to work with Fenty. Like you said, we were talking about earlier, but I have my notebook here and I had written it down. Like it's Fenty. The inclusivity from the start, the dedication to equity and making sure that like her team is like paid fairly. Like I can tell that Rihanna and her team were very intentional.
Yes.
About how they wanted to, like you said, how they wanted to do their marketing, both organic and paid, as well as like the product marketing and the positioning that they chose, which completely bucked all the trends.
Right.
I don't know. Like I feel like Ms. Robin Fenty herself, Rihanna, she is it. And that is why.
I was like, you deserve every cent of that money. And the product quality from
so
the Fenty line to the Fenty Beauty line to the skincare line, like I have not had a single quality complaint. And I'm like, that's not easy to do in an era of fast fashion and you're targeting. And a lot of times when you are targeting a multicultural consumer, I feel like that's where they start cutting corners and you're like, what is this quality? And that quality is. So, well, then maybe this will be the answer to your next question, but one celebrity you'd want to collaborate with and one you'd want to get advice from.
So Rihanna, I would love to, if you're listening, I I would love to consult for her or work with her on in some capacity eventually. If that would be probably a dream come true. But one person who I would love to seek advice from is Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah.
Like Ryan Reynolds, I don't know how the man does it all, but like he
Right?
really has. He's worked in ad tech now. Like he's on the CTV side doing like targeting and stuff like that. He has his own creative agency. He's got a marketing agency. He hard launched his wife's 2 new brands as well, including his own brands. Like the man understands brand marketing.
Company, like he is.
Yeah, like he should teach I think he should teach a class. I really do. I would totally sign up for it because I think the way he approaches an integrated marketing strategy is just very unusual. But it works. It's distinctive, and I mean, the man is kind of made something out of nothing. It's very impressive.
It is, and his pulse on culture is really impressive too because of all the things he has going on. He keeps a very strong pulse on culture.
Yeah,
He knows his lane. Like you don't see him speaking out on something that like isn't his. He really, you're right. He could teach a master class in like how to develop a company, multiple brands, run them successfully, but also not in any way disrupt your acting or your brand on that side either. It's fascinating.
totally agree. Yeah.
Smart gentlemen. What are the least likely 3 words someone would use to describe you?
I think the least likely 3, probably one is lackluster.
Yeah.
My name means like lively, so it's kind of like normative determinism or whatever you call it. I think uninformed. I try very hard to be informed and like consume as much news as I can stomach. Make sure that I'm always learning. And then the last one, I think maybe lazy. I feel like I've always been a hard worker. I come from a really hardworking family. I'm one of 8 kids. My mom was a single mom, so she was always hustling. So yeah, I think I've just been raised to grind. So that's probably it.
Right, I'm one of 6. Where do you rank in the age of those? 8?
Number 3.
Number 3.
But my older 2 siblings are considerably older than me, so I'm basically the oldest.
You're
child.
like the oldest, big sister energy. I feel like it's funny whenever I say I come from a family of 6. People are like, oh, and I'm like, single mom. We figured it out. Everyone's like you.
My normal, yeah, you're normal.
But you learn to hustle early. Like it is. I mean, I knew I had to make my own money. If I wanted pocket money, it was going to be up to me to figure out how to do it. And it also gave, I think, you have this interesting compassion for others because you see the impact your presence has on your siblings. So it changes the way you kind of move in the world. It's just, they should do a whole thing on like kids from big families and sisters.
Yeah.
If you devoted your life to one social impact cause, what would it be?
I think the biggest one for me is wealth inequality. I would probably dedicate myself to because I think it unlocks a lot of the other. I think that's the biggest, for me, is the biggest root. If we fix wealth inequality, we fix a lot of like the climate justice issues. We fix a lot of racial inequality issues. We fix food insecurity issues. There's just a lot to consider. Hook me up.
Right? There's a study just done. I'm going to get the state wrong. I think it's Minnesota. It's one of the M's. But they've decided to implement lunches for kids and a base salary, or maybe it was New Mexico, a base salary. They've done all these things. And within a year, full changes in their whole economy. You're right. The environment, the stability, mental health went up. It's just like, if you give people a living wage and they can function and live and you provide childcare, the changes you can see in society. So just
absolutely.
Equity.
Absolutely. Where I live in Scotland, Scotland has piloted a program I think it's called like the child benefit payment. And so they've been able to, I believe, half child poverty in 5 years. Just with one payment made, I think it's like made like once a month. It's not an insane amount of money. I think it's only like £25, but it helps, help with fuel insecurity and food insecurity. And, it really helps the most vulnerable people. And so I'm so proud to live here. And like you said, it's very similar to what you're describing, right? Like we can really unlock a lot of, benefits of better health outcomes, better mental health outcomes, live happier, more fulfilling lives. And, sometimes it just takes a little extra care and a little extra cash.
How many billionaires do we need? I'm like, how do you even spend that money in a lifetime? Like how many billionaires?
Can't take it with you when you go.
Like, how much how much do you actually need in your life?
I don't, not that much, my opinion.
Not at all. Okay, what travel experience is on your wish list? Where have you not been?
I haven't been to West Africa at
Ooh,
all.
same.
So that's really on my list. I feel like just like there's a cultural
Yeah.
connection, like a deep one, that I would love to explore. So Lagos, Nigeria is really high on my
Mhm.
list. Also because I'm trying to eat the food,
Same.
but the food's real good. But that's for me is my goal.
It's such a beautiful, I know it's on my goal. It's on my absolute travel list. I also want to do the Ghana experience.
Yes.
I'm not someone who loves to relive like histories of slavery. I am someone who like
Sure.
learned from him, but that experience I heard is just like soul changing. So I'm really
Heard.
fascinated too on that journey. The New Year's thing, everyone goes for New Year's. My goal 1 year is to go for New Year's to have that whole Ghana experience. And
I've heard it's awesome.
no, or Afrochella. I also heard Afrochella is just
Ooh, I don't know about
I
Afrochella.
think they do it in Lagos every year, I think. But like, girl, you're
Okay.
younger than me. Go to Afrochella. Like, you don't. I gotta
Okay.
haul kids with me everywhere. Go to Afrochella. Go live your
I
best
might do that. I don't have kids yet, so that sounds
life.
good.
If you do all the things before you have them. They're great, but oh my gosh, they really hate on your style, what you plan on doing. And last question. I hope you have a really good answer to this. Would your 12-year-old self think you're cool?
My 12-year-old self would think it was cool that I live in the UK since I was born over here but raised in the States. Like she would love that. The rest of it, she would probably be like, you were supposed to be a diplomat and you sell ads, though that's kind of whack. She'd probably think that, but I think she would really like the fact that I have such a nice husband who's really great. She'd be
Yeah.
proud of me for that one. So I think there's some things, some give and take. She'd probably give me an overall score of like, you're a little whack, like you're kind of old, like not as cool as you should be. But some of your stuff, I was very like, progression oriented as a 12-year-old. I was very like mature for my age, as they'll say. And I used to daydream about my future life all the time. And I always wanted to just be, traveling and stuff. And so I do get to do some of that. So I think she and I would be but I don't think she would think I was cool.
12-year-olds, I love 12 because it was an age of self-awareness, but it's also an age where you had no limits on what you were dreaming about. So it's fascinating to see different answers. Well,
Oh yeah.
I think any 12-year-old would think you're super freaking cool. So
Aw.
I feel like that's not up for debate. Thank you so much. I could talk to you probably for another hour, but I clearly have to stay on some sort of time commitment. But this is such a topic that's close to my heart, but I think it's a topic that's actually a big trend in the industry right now. It's like, we have to do something about this opportunity that is in front of us. And I think you discussed it in such an eloquent way of things that are truly tangible and some really great takeaways. So thank you for being an incredible guest. How can people connect with you, find you? How can Rihanna find you and hire you? How about that?
Okay, so I am on LinkedIn, and I'll make sure that Bianca drops my link.
I will. Sure.
And you can also email me. I'll give Bianca that link too. But that's probably the best way to get a hold of me and just kind of watch this space. I'm hopeful that I will be able to get a website up and running kind of soonish. But in the interim, you can check me out. I've been on a couple of other podcasts recently, and I was recently quoted in Adweek. So you can check me out on there as well, where I talk about marketing to the Hispanic audience in the United States.
Love it. All the receipts. I will make sure to put all those links in so that people can reach you. But also, you definitely would be an impactful consultant in the field. So excited to hear where your journey continues. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you for having me. I had the best time.